So, welcome to the second episode of Majlis and Markets. I'm your host, Hassan. Um, I'd like to thank everybody who downloaded and listened to our first episode, our pilot episode with Dr. Ryan Calder, which did a deep dive into Islamic finance. So, we really learned about the history and the political economy of Islamic finance. Today, in our second episode, we're going to be talking about a slightly different topic, the country of Kuwait. Where is Kuwait? Kuwait is a country in the Middle East, I believe, and it borders Iraq, it borders Saudi Arabia, and it also shares a maritime border with Iran. Kuwait is an interesting country. I've had the privilege of visiting Kuwait over the past decade, and it's an interesting country because it holds around 7% of the world's oil reserves, yet it doesn't receive as much attention or focus from analysts or people looking at this region when compared to, say, like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, or even indeed Qatar. My guest today is a specialist on Kuwait. He's a Kuwaiti national himself. He has an illustrious career both in banking, finance, and academia. And I'd like to welcome my guest, Dr. Issam Al Tawari. Issam, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you for having me. And I really looking forward to a very interesting dialogue discussion. And this is going to be my first English podcast, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think I forgot to mention you're also the managing director of Newbury Economic Consulting. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And it's like it's a debt capital markets advisory, or what?
It's a debt capital markets advisory, and on one side, and we do basically cater and provide services to SMEs and the local market in Kuwait as well.
Yeah, very good, very good. And you have obviously a deep background in the Gulf debt capital markets, and I'm sure we're going to get onto that and talk about that. But Issam, I brought you here today, or I've invited you here today to talk about your country, the country of Kuwait. It's a country which holds around 7% of the world's oil reserves, and it hosts one of the probably the oldest and the largest sovereign wealth fund, the Kuwait Investment Authority, which I think has around $800 to $900 billion in assets. I don't think anybody knows like the precise figure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a country, obviously, which is important in the global economy when it comes to oil. Some would also argue that it's also an important country when it comes to geopolitics. But when we look at Kuwait, it doesn't receive as much attention as when compared, like I mentioned in the intro, with Qatar or the UAE or Saudi Arabia. And indeed, although Kuwait holds all this oil, all this wealth, the World Bank, the IMF, they're all predicting in 2024 and that the economy is going to struggle. Maybe you could talk a little bit about like why Kuwait is not viewed as much when compared to its neighbors.
Well, I mean, thank you for the sort of the backdrop and the introduction about Kuwait. When we talk about Kuwait, we have to talk about two sort of distinct sort of stages in history for Kuwait, and to learn and understand why we are here. And we have to know where we were so that to reach where we are right now. Kuwait was actually one of the first GCC states to get its independence in 1961 from Great Britain, and Kuwait has always been on the forefront of politics, trade, banking, social development, and education, because it was like it preceded the rest of the Gulf by 10 years, and oil was already started to being sort of exported from the 1948, and basically because of the petrodollars, the British sort of suggested that the surplus gets invested in the stock market in the UK and Europe in particular, and that's why in 1953 the Kuwait Investment Office had basically opened in London with a special status and with a tax under a special tax regime. So that was the seed of the Kuwait Sovereign Wealth Fund. So basically, we can say that Kuwait's investment preceded its independence as well.
Yes.
And I mean, by 8 years. So Kuwait has been pretty much an open society, an open market, and basically with the flow of trade going between the Gulf and the rest of the world, oil and so on and so forth. So Kuwait also played a major role in helping the newly independent Arab states and part of the Arab solidarity and so on and so forth. So the Kuwait Fund was established to support all these different countries. So open society, active in the international international scene, both on politics and in. However, in 1979, with the revolution in Iran and the changes in the geopolitics of the region, has basically brought a new dimension. And the Iraqi-Iranian war, and Kuwait had no choice but to support Iraq because of its proximity and the historic ties. Right or wrong, we cannot judge those positions today, but that was what happened. And as a result of the Iraqi-Iranian war, Kuwait has been a target for of attacks that even reached the attempted assassination of the Emir of Kuwait. At which point, Kuwait has decided to basically shift gears and change its priorities. Priority is it's not for economy and business. The priority was more about security. And since then, Kuwait had played a more and more local, more and more low-key kind of profile. And therefore, so then you have the Gulf War with the invasion of Iraq and basically destruction of the infrastructure in Kuwait. And again, that even put more emphasis on security as a priority. So today, when comparing Kuwait and what it's been through with the rest of the GCC, the security and the welfare of the local citizens and residents became a priority over basically playing a major role in international markets. So that's why we are where we are today.
I think Kuwait is thanks for that analysis. And yeah, it sounds Kuwait's got a very interesting history from its independence up until today. And you mentioned the Iran-Iraq War, which lasted 8 years between I think 1980 and 1988, so the year I was born. And then obviously the invasion of Kuwait from Iraq, which then led to the Americans entering and a coalition of other countries as well. But I think Kuwait is an interesting country in the sense that it's kind of different to the other Gulf Arab countries, and because of its political system. Is there something behind that?
Well, definitely. Kuwait, basically, after its independence, when they wanted to, the Emir of Kuwait then, Sheikh Abdullah Salim, wanted to basically have a more of a participative political scheme. And that's because he believed in the power of the people and to get legitimacy. So when the constitution was drafted then, it was drafted in the form of basically where there will be a democracy and representations through free elections for the people. And at the same time, there will be a kind of constitutional monarchy but an active one rather than a passive one on the part of the on the ruling sort of side, and therefore the passing on of power will always be in the dynasty of Sheikh Mubarak al-Kabir, which is who's the great grandfather of Al Sabah, the existing Al Sabah sort of rulers. Two, the election of the crown prince will always be or needs to be accepted and endorsed by the parliament. So this is an indirect way of appointing the future emir by the parliament. So, and that gives sort of a more sort of weight to the voice of the people in Kuwait. And therefore, over the years, Kuwaitis have always enjoyed the freedom of speech and expression, and our democracy sometimes becomes too loud or sometimes too chaotic for our neighbors. So it created a little bit of sort of uncomfortable sort of situation when comparing. However, democracy also comes with a price, and the price of democracy is that you need to go through a process of decision process that's much lengthy than having an autocratic system. And therefore, when we look at the economic development of Kuwait and the base of that development in the last 20, 25 years, it's much slower than as compared to the rest of the Gulf. And some people put part of the blame on our democracy. But my opinion is that on the long run, we might not have the best economic performance. However, we would have a much more sort of active political environment where people can express their views without any fear. And that also creates a sort of an environment for creativity, which probably Kuwait is known for, as well as there is a process of checks and balances, which reduces the chances for corruption. But also the cases for corruption that has been sort of has been exposed. It's been exposed because we have a democratic system that basically calls for transparency and calls for accountability.
Yeah.
So not hearing about corruption in other GCC states doesn't mean that does not exist. We just expose everything to the general public. So is it good or bad? It's a way of it's a system that Kuwaitis have chosen and accepted, and they feel comfortable with.
Yeah, I think Kuwait is an interesting one because, like, it's very, like you mentioned, it's very different to say like somewhere like Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates or even Oman, for example, or Qatar, in the sense that the parliament has quite an active parliament and that it's quite an important body within the political system of Kuwait, and it's not a unilateral monarchy like say somewhere like Saudi Arabia or somewhere like that. One thing I think that's interesting about Kuwait also it goes back to what you were saying. Kuwait does have probably a better level of freedom, media freedom, and political freedom per se. There was a really good program on Netflix a few months ago. I was watching it. It was called The Exchange, and it talked about Kuwait's stock market in the 1980s, which was quite good. And it talked about, and even I've noticed this when I was in Kuwait myself, like the participation of women in the workforce and the participation of women in political life as well. Albeit it's not like on the same level as say the West. Women are very, very well integrated into society, are they not, in Kuwait?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, women are very much integrated. I mean, I can give you a sort of a starting example. The Ministry of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs, 90% of the staff in that ministry are females, believe it or not. So, I mean, one would think that this probably is going to be the least sort of ministry where female will be working. In Kuwait, it's the largest percentage of female workforce that works. And that's actually just been announced last week when they were talking about statistics. Kuwaiti women, they form around 35 to 40% of the workforce in Kuwait.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
so it just tells you, and we have now women, not only women doctors and educators and civil workers, but also we have now women judges and public prosecutors.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Even I remember when I went to Kuwait and I went to NBK. The number of women working, not just as tellers, but like working in executive positions or in very senior management positions was quite startling compared to in other GCC countries. Moving to the economy, we'll come back to the politics in a bit, but the economy, like as I think I mentioned in the introduction and also at the beginning of this conversation, that Kuwait is a very oil-reliant country. It holds 7% of the world's proven oil reserves. It's got a lot of power in the oil market, but some say that this black gold or this blessing has also been a curse for Kuwait in terms of its economic diversification and development. What are your thoughts on Kuwait's oil reliance?
Well, there's been studies that that says that countries that are resource rich perform far less than countries that are resource scarce. And a good example of that is when you look at Japan and compare it to Russia. Okay, and the same example applies to Kuwait, because when you have rich resources in a country, there will be a heavier reliance on extracting those resources and basically financing the budgets out of it. While if you have a scarce resource economy, you'll be relying more on the human development and education, where it would make a much difference, much more of a difference and impact on the economy. And so Kuwait has, about, I would say, around 85 to 90% of its revenue is coming from oil. The non-oil sector contribution to the GDP is around probably 10%, which is negligible in all honesty. And basically, and when we look at the budget, our budget excludes income from our sovereign wealth fund. That has a different sort of set of accounts. But when we look at the sort of the running costs of the country and the budget, there's a heavy reliance on oil. And what's the government is doing about it? It has always a stated objective to diversify the economy and move away from oil and hydrocarbon. But this stated objective has been there for the last 40 or 45 years. What has been done about it? Probably very little. But we're coming to a stage where oil is not, the importance of oil over the next 10 to 15 years will be much lower with the sort of the rise of alternatives and a clean energy sort of requirements and so on and so forth. And so, is oil will disappear in importance? The answer is no. Will it disappear as will its importance be reduced as a source of energy? My answer would be yes. But oil will continue to be a source of a natural resource as industrial sort of for industries, for petrochemicals and so on and so forth. So today oil forms about 65% of its value is as an energy source.
Mm.
In 15 years' time, probably that's going to be dropped to about 40 or less. So we're talking about the inverse sort of situation where oil will be sort of used for as a source for petrochemical products. What would be the price of oil in 15 years' time? Not so sure, but we have to be prepared for that for that coming period, and because we have an increasing sort of demands on our budget, and we're not doing much about it. So Kuwait needs to take sort of hard decisions and um, uh, and be prepared for economic
Economic diversification or
restructuring.
For restructuring, yes, yeah.
So Kuwait has to be ready for economic restructuring, but this is always will face a huge resistance from the parliament, because Kuwait is a welfare state, has a stated sort of objective and commitment towards the healthcare, education, and housing of and jobs towards its citizens. Can it fulfill those commitments over the next 10 years? This will be very difficult, and therefore, to draw back from these commitments, Kuwait has to first change the way they're managing the economy. One, look at privatization, give the private sector a bigger role, because it will bring more efficiency to the economy. It will also produce, when you privatize, you will probably generate more income to the country, reduce your expenses, and attract foreign direct investments into the country. Kuwait enjoys, today, Kuwait has attracted around $600 million a year in foreign direct investments. When you compare Kuwait, for example, with a tiny country, a neighboring country like Bahrain has attracted 2.5 billion during the same period. You're looking at Oman, okay, they've attracted 5 billion.
Yes.
So looking at the potential to improve foreign direct investment to Kuwait with sort of that is resource rich, and with its strategic geographic position, acting as a hub towards two large population, that's Iraq and Iran, as markets that, there's huge investment opportunities. Are we going to exploit or take advantage of that sort of that situation? We've always been relying on oil, so we've been too lazy to develop and make use of those opportunities that are actually on our doorstep. So these are crucial sort of questions, needs political decision, needs political will, in order to basically reduce reliance on oil, reduce subsidies, privatize, and basically do and probably start some type of taxes. Taxes is a big taboo in Kuwait, and when you talk about it, says we've got our sovereign wealth fund. Yeah. Why, if we have all that money, why are you basically dipping your hand into our pockets? Yeah. So that's been the dilemma, and so the government needs to prepare the people for the next 10 to 15 years.
Yes. With the oil, who does Kuwait sell this oil to? Is it to China? Is it to India, or who is it to?
Well, basically, our biggest trade partner is China. Yeah, we provide more than 40% of our oil goes to China, and then I think India. The U.S. is probably one of our smaller customers. Yeah, China is our we sell them, I don't know, around over $30 billion.
So it's a large partner, or
Yeah,
largest partner.
yeah,
Um, and obviously, like as you mentioned, oil plays a big role in the budget and in the
yes,
public finances of Kuwait. And
yes.
you mentioned a lot about the subsidies and how the sovereign wealth fund. I think also like within there's correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's two sovereign wealth funds. There's what's called the Future Generations Fund and the actual KIA itself. And I think I think it's the
No, we
Future
have the general fund. We have the general
yeah, the
reserve.
General Reserve Fund. Yes.
We have general reserve, and we have the sovereign wealth fund, which is the future generation fund.
Yeah, and the government can't access this money, right, unless they go through the parliament.
Yes, yes, yes.
And this is a politically sensitive topic, I know, in Kuwait,
Yeah, because
or has
it's
been.
yeah, it's because once you start dipping into that fund, then it becomes very easy to liquidate it. And part of the credit rating of Kuwait is relying on our sovereign wealth fund sort of existence. So once you start using it, depleting it, then our credit rating would start basically go south.
And this leaves Kuwait in a bit of a conundrum liquidity-wise, as we saw. And this is another topic I wanted to talk to you about. Was in 2017 was a really interesting year, not just for Kuwait but for the other Gulf countries when they issued or started tapping the international capital markets. And Kuwait came with its first sovereign bond in 2017. I believe there was a dual tranche 5 and a 10-year note, respectively. 8 billion, I think they issued with an order book of about 20 billion. I know you followed this a long time with the setting up
Yeah.
of the debt management office and all the developments preceding that, and indeed after the issuance. Could you maybe give us a little bit of a snapshot of how Kuwait got to issuing a bond, or why is Kuwait not a major issue, or hasn't issued any international debt in the market given its oil and credit strength?
Well, Kuwait can borrow under with a special decree, and that decree is basically passed on as a public debt law through the parliament. So the last the last debt public debt law was issued in 2007 or 2008, and it was valid for 10 years. So 2014, 2015, with the drop in oil prices, and basically the budgets of the GCC countries started basically suffering deficits. And so 2016, 2015, 2016, the deficits were funded from the general reserve. So we started depleting the general reserves. And so in 2017, towards the end of that mandate, Kuwait basically went to the market and issued its first sovereign bond.
International sovereign bond.
International sovereign bond, yes. And then following which, that mandate expired. 2018, 2019, up to today, there were attempts to basically to issue a new public debt law.
Right.
But that was faced with resistance and distrust by the parliament, stating several reasons. One is saying, well, why should we borrow to fund salaries? So basically, for the government.
Public sector. Yeah.
I mean, if we're going to borrow, it should be targeted towards capital expenditure, infrastructure, that we can see sort of the impact on the economy rather than basically going into a waste. One. Two, the parliament always sees that there is a huge waste in the way the government expenditure taking place, and saying, well, rather than borrowing, you should tighten your belt and stop all this waste that's been is taking place. Three, we need to see effective and efficient public financing policy in place so that we can entrust you with borrowing. So for these four, they're saying, many members of the parliament, they believe that we have sufficient resources and through our future generation fund and within the government, that we do not need to borrow. And therefore, why should we go and borrow? So with all these excuses taking place, the government has been basically going back and forth with the parliament, trying to make adjustments, give assurances, and so it's not going to be a carte blanche for them to go ahead and borrow. There is a hope that something will come up in 2024, but we've been hearing the same noises and the same excuses over the past 7 or 8 years, and I don't know. But right now, Kuwait is being helped by the improvement in oil prices.
Yeah.
This year's budget, we have an expected deficit of around $10 billion. How are they going to fund it? I'm not so sure, but maybe they'll with that in place, probably they're going to issue new debt or borrow locally.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was in Kuwait in 2017, and when they issued the bond, I went to a presentation by the IMF delegation to Kuwait, and it was given in I can't remember the building, but it was one of the buildings that wasn't destroyed during the invasion of Iraq in Kuwait. Very beautiful building, and basically the IMF guy who was there giving the presentation, talking about the reforms Kuwait made and the bond and how successful it was. There was a line of Kuwaiti business families and people from the merchant class in Kuwait and some other people from the Kuwaiti political life were there, and a lot of them were like quite upset about the bond. And one man stood up and said, "Why are we issuing international debt and borrowing from international capital markets when we have all this oil wealth? Where is all this oil wealth going? And like, why are we not spending it on education and healthcare and all these other things?" So I guess, like, although the market really likes the Kuwaiti sovereign bond, given strong credit metrics and all these things and a strong credit rating, people inside Kuwait, from my understanding, weren't too happy about the situation with the bond. Is that correct to say? Or
yeah, absolutely. It's for the reason I just explained, because they think it's unnecessary. We borrowed in 1991, 1992. After the liberation, the jumbo loan of 5.5, and it was never renewed. So basically, at maturity, Kuwait paid it in full, and they never borrowed from the international market since then. And even when Kuwait Airways were modernizing its fleet in 1995. It was asked by KIA, which was the principal owner of Kuwait Airways, to prepay the aircraft financing that was in place at the time. So yeah, there's a tendency of basically being debt free and amongst the government sort of public policy holders at the time. However, today you cannot continue managing your public financing without having the ability to borrow. So right now the government's being curtailed. They have their hands tied behind their back for not being able. So not to have that liberty is very is very very it's wrong to happen. Whether so whether they borrow or not, that's one thing, but not being able to borrow, that's another issue, which is wrong, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, as a debt capital markets practitioner, obviously, you would obviously advocate for more for people or issuers to access international capital markets. And if you read IMF reports, World Bank reports, they talk a lot about how Kuwait should pass its public debt law. One thing I wanted to ask you was about the sukuk. I think sukuk, obviously, the bond is important, but I remember us having a conversation about 4 or 5 years ago about the sukuk. Is there any chance Kuwait could issue sukuk, or does the bond have to come first?
Well, the bond has to come first, I think. Then the sukuk. They've been talking about sukuk and what needs to be done, what kind of assets they can use for sukuk, but that's basically now put on the back burner because in the absence of the debt capital of the public debt law, this discussion would be meaningless. So once that's in place, then the Ministry of Finance or the Debt Management Office can start talking about issuing a bond, issuing sukuks, doing all kind of debt instruments that would be required locally, internationally, and so on and so forth. But in the absence of the debt law, public debt law, that's
And would they do you think another sovereign bond in the international capital market would help, say, other Kuwaiti issuers, non-government issuers, to issue in the international market, or do you think they already have good access?
Well, basically, the Kuwait Petroleum Company, the oil company, has been in constant dialogue, discussions with the market. They do not require to have the public debt law in place, and they have their capital expenditure projects over the next 10 years, and I think they're expecting to raise around, I don't know, maybe 15 to 20 billion dollars for their upstream and downstream projects, and so yeah, so quasi sovereign entities can come to the market, and so probably we might see Kuwait Airways coming to the market later on after the Kuwait Oil Company, or we can see those joint venture projects or the PPP projects coming to the market. Yeah, but that would be possible, absolutely.
Yeah, and all of this goes back. I think you mentioned this when you were explaining a lot of successive governments. Obviously, we talked earlier about the political system in Kuwait and the political life in Kuwait, and obviously successive governments in Kuwait have tried to present or try and get this legislation passed. But it seems to me, as an outsider and people having read articles about Kuwait's always in a constant election cycle, let's say, with the parliament. Do you think what's the likelihood of 2024, 2025 being any better?
Difficult to say. We would probably be going through a period of consolidation of power, and during such period, we might one would hope that we'll have more political stability, but this remains to be seen.
And obviously, all of this, like with the parliament, plays a role not just in the Kuwaiti debt law being passed, but like other reforms as well, right? Like you mentioned about taxes. I think Kuwait and I think Qatar are the other countries that haven't introduced the GCC-wide VAT in the country, and there's been other reforms which have been lingering, right, that need to be passed.
Yes, definitely. The word taxes in Kuwait, gets into the parliament, the members of the parliament sort of nerves, because uh, their 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 their, their, their supporters, the general public, the electorals, uh, they have not been prepared to basically be accountable towards the government, and therefore the way to get re-elected is to oppose any taxes in any shape or form. And so that's why the government needs to prepare the grounds, prepare the people, and ensure that they have good policies in place, good people in place to manage the economy, and see and show results, so that people will have more faith and trust in the system before they introduce any new taxes into the system.
What other reforms does Kuwait need to do to improve its economic diversification efforts?
First, to have the right people at the right time. Two, to restructure, reform the current government, basically reduce the number of government entities. Three, start privatizing the postal services, electricity, part of the oil sector, the telecom sector, rely more on education. The cost of public education per head is about 30% more expensive than private schools.
Right.
So on average, private school student would cost around about $10,000
US dollars.
US dollars.
Yeah.
In the government, it costs around about $18,000.
Oh wow, it's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's better to basically the government pays the private sector to educate the students, and basically one, we would have better outcome, better education, and reduce the cost. So and it's been talked about, but rarely things happen. Housing, okay, the government is still going through the old sort of system of planning new areas, developing the infrastructure, then awarding contracts to build for the account of the government, and then distributing houses. We have about now 100,000 applications of people who's been waiting for housing benefits, and some of them have to wait between 15 to 18 years.
It's long time.
So basically, they've just passed a new law, which hopefully will involve and engage the private sector to basically be awarded a plot of land. They develop it within certain specification, sell it, and basically provide, and the government will provide some kind of financing facilities in order to cut short those sort of the backlog of applications. So all of these things, means that the government should move from being we have a very social we have a socialist system without us recognizing it. So the government has to step back, be basically more of an regulator, supervisor, rather than service provider. Because as a service provider, they have very poor quality and high cost in terms of output.
Right. And in drawing the podcast to a close shortly, COP28 is taking place in Dubai at the moment. I don't want to predict what's going to happen there, but climate is a big issue at the moment in a lot of countries, and not the least in Kuwait. It's a massive issue, or it should be a massive issue in Kuwait. I mean, there was a documentary I was watching last year about how Kuwait could become uninhabitable within the next few decades, and that how temperatures. I've been in Kuwait in the summer. One summer I went there, and it was 50. I think it hit 54 or 55 degrees centigrade. And I honestly don't know how you guys like survive. And obviously, the Kuwaiti government has pledged net zero by I think 2060 or 2050, one of these ones. What are your thoughts on climate risks in Kuwait and mitigation?
Well, climate risks. One, Kuwait in the 70s was one of the leading countries in solar power research. So we have, as you've just mentioned, we have lots of sun most of the year. So solar energy can be a great alternative for producing energy in Kuwait. And so basically, that research in solar energy sort of took a backseat in the 80s, and now it's being revived again. Solar energy today is much cheaper, much more affordable than 20, 30 years ago. And so we need to basically look at clean alternative energy. The Kuwait has been suffering from pollution since the Gulf War in 1991. And so, and we have been having above average cases of respiratory sort of problems in Kuwait as a result. And so it's all to do with the changing in the climate change in the globe. And so to move and shift towards having a greener energy, reduce the pollution, and basically provide and try to meet at least not to be left behind with where the world is going. I think net zero, we can't really reach net zero emission within the stated deadline, but definitely we can work towards that.
Do you think, a lot of people have been talking at COP about finance. Do you think the Kuwaiti financial system can help finance the transition, or do you think a lot of it has to do with policies and politics?
It's the latter, yes, but that's not to say that the banking system will not support. The banking system is quite strong, quite solid, quite liquid, and if there are stated policies towards making change, I think the banking system in Kuwait will be there to help and finance that. But the most important thing is to have the desire, the intention, and the will to make a change.
Mm. And finally, Issam, what are your thoughts on Kuwait going into 2024 and beyond? Are you optimistic on the outlook for your country, or are you skeptical?
Well, I mean, again, it's like sitting in front of a crystal ball and trying to gaze into the future. What I can say that with the Russian-Ukrainian war, as we go into 2024, there are no signs of it basically going to stop. So the energy, the demand for energy will continue to be there. Prices will continue to be there. The OPEC Plus, they've just agreed to cut their production, so the prices will go north. So this will help to shore up the budgets of Kuwait and the rest of GCC countries. And therefore, is there any hope of any change and reforms with such a level of at this level of prices? I would say no. So no reforms will taking place over next 2024. Will the government be able to go into the market and borrow? I'm unsure. I would give it a 30% chance that the public debt law will be passed during 2024. Will it be more than the same? Most probably, but we're probably going to be seeing more changes on the political side. Okay, so we might have some. As you probably know, we have around 400 to 500 senior executive government positions that are vacant. So, most of our institutions in Kuwait are being run by acting heads. And when you have acting heads of departments, ministries, undersecretaries, they will not take crucial decisions. They will be more of caretakers. And that's slowing things down. So hopefully, with the power consolidation, hopefully taking place early next year, we will be seeing those positions being filled with young blood, more capable people, and we might see the impact and the effect probably 2025. Mm-hmm. So no changes in 2024, I'd say.
And finally, Issam, how can people reach you or read any of your research? Do you publish research regularly, or your thoughts or your commentary on Kuwait?
Well, basically, I write a few articles which are published, and I use them, and I publish them on LinkedIn.
Mostly in Arabic, right? I guess.
Well, no, my articles are mostly in English.
Oh, okay, yeah, very good.
Yeah, but my interviews are mostly in Arabic.
Right, so, and are you active on social media?
When I do my media interviews, it's mostly in Arabic. So LinkedIn is a place where people can basically follow my thoughts, my ideas, my discussions, and that would be my platform.
Issam Al Tawari, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me. Really, it's been a pleasure having being part of your podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Issam. Thank you.